The blood on Leora's dress had dried to the color of rust. Rhett Calder noticed it first. Not the woman herself, not the skeletal children huddled against her sides, but that specific shade of brown-red that meant old wounds and no help coming. His horse had caught the scent of something wrong a quarter-mile back, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at whatever the wind carried across the basin. Rhett had ignored it initially. The frontier was full of death. You couldn't stop for all of it. But his horse kept pulling left, and Rhett had learned during the war that sometimes animals knew things men were too stubborn to acknowledge. So he'd let the reins go slack. The woman was propped against a wagon wheel that belonged to nothing. No wagon, no team, just the wheel itself lying flat in the dirt like a gravestone. Her children couldn't have been more than 5 and 7, both girls, both with that hollow-eyed stare that came from watching hope die in increments. They didn't move when Rhett approached, didn't cry out or beg, just watched him with the blank patience of creatures who'd already accepted their fate. Leora's eyes opened when his shadow fell across her face. "Keep riding," she said. Her voice was barely there, a whisper scraped raw. "Nothing here worth stopping for." Rhett dismounted anyway. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud that seemed too loud in the vast silence. Up close, he could see the full scope of it. The torn dress, the makeshift bandage on her leg soaked through with infection, the way her collarbones jutted sharp enough to cut. The children were worse. Their lips had cracked open and bled. Their fingers were bone-wrapped in skin. "When they leave you?" Rhett asked. Leora's laugh was bitter and brief. "Does it matter?" "Might. 3 days." She shifted slightly, and the pain that crossed her face was immediate and total. "Wagon train pushed through. I couldn't keep pace, slowing everyone down. They voted. Voted. Democracy." The word dripped with venom. Real civilized. Rhett looked at the wheel again. Understood. They'd left her one wheel, one piece of a wagon, a token gesture so they could tell themselves they weren't monsters. He'd seen men do worse with better excuses. "You got water?" he asked. "Had some. It's gone." The smaller child, couldn't have been more than 5, made a sound. Not quite a whimper. More like the noise a dying animal makes when it's too far gone to fight. Rhett's jaw tightened. "I got supplies," he said. 2 days' ride from here. There's a camp I use. Got shelter. Got food." Leora stared at him like he was speaking a language she'd forgotten. "Why? Why what? Why would you?" Her eyes were fever bright, searching his face for the catch. "Nobody stops. Not out here. Not for this." Rhett didn't have an answer that would satisfy her. Didn't have one that satisfied him. He'd ridden past plenty of trouble before. The war had taught him that stopping to help usually just meant you died alongside whoever you were trying to save. He'd learned to keep his head down, keep moving, keep the ghosts at a distance. But something about that wagon wheel sitting there like a monument to other people's cowardice made his stomach turn. "Can you ride?" he asked. "No." "Can you hold on?" Leora's eyes moved to her daughters. The older one had wrapped her arms around her sister, and they were watching this exchange with the careful attention of children who'd learned that adult decisions determined whether you lived or died. "If I can't?" Leora asked. "Then I'll tie you to the saddle." It wasn't a joke. Leora seemed to understand that. She studied his face, the hard lines, the sun damage, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. Whatever she saw there must have been convincing enough because she nodded once. "The girls first," she said. "If something happens, if we can't all make it, you take the girls." "Nobody's getting left behind." "You don't know that. I'm saying it anyway." Rhett moved before she could argue further. He went to his horse and pulled down his canteen, brought it to the older girl first. She took it with shaking hands and drank too fast. He had to pull it away before she made herself sick. "Slow," he said, not unkind. "Little sips. You drink it all at once, you'll just throw it back up." She nodded, eyes watering, and passed the canteen to her sister. The younger one drank with more control, like she'd been warned about this before. When they'd both had enough, Rhett brought the canteen to Leora. She drank even slower than her daughters, measuring each swallow with desperate precision. "What's your name?" she asked when she'd finished. "Rhett Calder." "I'm Leora, Leora Vance." She gestured weakly to the girls. "That's Emma. That's Sarah." "All right." Rhett corked the canteen. "Emma? Sarah, you ever ridden a horse before?" Emma, the older one, shook her head. Sarah just stared. It's easy, Rhett said, which was a lie, but a useful one. You just hold on tight and let the horse do the work. I'm going to put you both up there together, and you're going to keep each other steady. Can you do that? Emma looked at her mother. Leora nodded, and that seemed to be enough. Rhett lifted both girls. Christ, they weighed nothing, like picking up bundles of kindling, and settled them onto his horse's back. The animal shifted, but didn't spook. Good horse. Steady. Getting Leora up was harder. She couldn't put weight on her left leg at all, and when Rhett got his arm under her shoulders, he could feel the heat radiating from her infected wound. Fever. Bad fever. She needed more than his camp supplies could offer, but his camp was all there was for 100 miles in any direction. This is going to hurt, he warned. Everything hurts. Fair point. Rhett lifted her as gently as he could, which wasn't very gentle at all, and Leora's sharp intake of breath told him exactly how much it cost her. He got her positioned behind the girls, her arms wrapped around Emma to keep them all anchored. You pass out, you fall off, Rhett said. So don't pass out. I'll do my best. He believed her. There was something in her eyes, some core of iron that hadn't bent despite everything trying to break it. She'd keep herself conscious through sheer stubbornness, if nothing else. Rhett swung up behind her, and suddenly his horse was carrying 4 people instead of 1. The animal snorted, clearly annoyed, but didn't protest beyond that. Rhett gathered the reins and turned them north. 2 days? Leora asked. If we push, 3 if we don't. Push. You sure? I'm sure that if we take 3 days, I'll be dead by the end of them. Probably true. Rhett clicked his tongue and urged the horse into a walk. They couldn't run, not carrying this much weight, not with Leora barely holding on, but they could maintain a steady pace. Slow and steady. That's how you survived out here. You didn't sprint toward salvation. You just kept moving forward and hoped the ground held. The first hour passed in silence. The second hour, Sarah started crying, quiet tears that she tried to hide by pressing her face into her sister's back. Emma stroked her hair and made soft, shushing sounds, and Rhett pretended not to notice. Children's grief wasn't something he knew how to address. He'd seen plenty of it during the war, orphans wandering through burned-out towns, calling for parents who weren't going to answer, but witnessing it and knowing what to do about it were different things entirely. She's scared, Emma said eventually. Her voice was small but clear. She doesn't like horses. Horses are nothing to be scared of, Rhett said. They're just big and easy to spook. You treat them right, they'll take care of you. How do you treat them right? Stay calm. Don't make sudden moves. Let them know you're there. He paused. Same way you'd want someone to treat you. Emma considered this. Our pa used to have a horse before. Before what? Before he died. Rhett had figured as much. Dead husband, abandoned wife, orphaned children waiting to happen. It was a common enough story out here that it barely qualified as a tragedy anymore. I'm sorry, he said, because that's what you were supposed to say. Mama says sorry doesn't fix anything. Your mama's right. Then why'd you say it? Kid had a point. Rhett didn't have a good answer, so he didn't give one. Behind him, Leora's breathing had gone shallow and rhythmic. Asleep or unconscious, hard to tell which. Either way, her grip on Emma had loosened, and Rhett had to adjust his own position to keep her from sliding off. This was stupid, monumentally stupid. He should have left them, should have kept riding. Now he was responsible for 3 dying people and a horse that was already exhausted, and the odds of all of them making it to his camp were slim at best. But he'd made the choice, and Rhett Calder didn't unmake choices. The sun climbed higher, turned vicious. No shade out here, no relief. Just flat land and relentless heat and the constant awareness that water was a finite resource they were burning through faster than he'd like. Rhett rationed the canteen carefully, giving the girls small sips every hour, wetting Leora's lips when she roused enough to swallow. By nightfall, they'd covered maybe 15 miles. Not enough, nowhere near enough. Rhett found a shallow depression in the land, not quite a canyon, but enough of a dip to provide some shelter from the wind, and called a halt. He dismounted first, then helped the girls down. Emma stumbled when her feet hit the ground, legs cramping from hours in the saddle. Sarah just collapsed and stayed there. Leora was still conscious, barely. Rhett eased her down as carefully as he could, but there was no way to do it without jostling her leg. She made a sound, half gasp, half sob, that she tried to swallow before her daughters heard it. "I need to look at that wound," Rhett said. "No point. Let me be the judge of that." She didn't have the strength to argue. Rhett built a small fire, just enough for light, not enough to be seen from a distance, and examined her leg by the flickering glow. The infection had spread. The flesh around the wound was swollen and discolored, hot to the touch. If they'd been anywhere near a real town, a real doctor, they might have been able to save the leg. Out here? He didn't say what he was thinking, just cleaned the wound as best he could with water they couldn't afford to waste and wrapped it in fresh bandages from his pack. Leora watched him work with glassy eyes. "You know it's bad," she said. "I know. So why bother? Because giving up is easier than trying, and I'm not interested in easy." Leora's mouth twitched, might have been trying for a smile. "That's a terrible philosophy. It's kept me alive so far. Maybe you've just been lucky." "Maybe." Rhett tied off the bandage. "But I don't believe in luck. I believe in being too stubborn to die." "Is that what you think I am? Stubborn?" "I think you're still breathing when you shouldn't be. Call it what you want." This time she definitely smiled. Faint, but real. Then her eyes moved past him to where Emma and Sarah were huddled together near the fire, sharing the last piece of dried meat from his supplies. "If I don't make it," she started. "You'll make it." "If I don't," Leora continued, harder now, "you can't leave them out here. Promise me." Rhett met her eyes. They were the color of smoke, gray and restless. "I already told you, nobody gets left behind." "That's not a promise." "It's the only one you're getting." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever it was, she must have found it, because she nodded and let her eyes drift shut. Rhett stayed up through the night, feeding the fire in small increments, watching the horizon for movement that never came. The girls eventually fell asleep curled around each other like puppies. Leora's breathing stayed steady but shallow, each exhale a small victory. By dawn, he'd made a decision. They couldn't maintain this pace. Leora wouldn't survive another full day in the saddle, and the girls were already worn to nothing. But if he pushed the horse too hard, they'd end up stranded with no transportation at all, so he'd have to gamble. There was a trading post about 8 miles northeast, barely a structure, just a shack where trappers sometimes stopped to rest and resupply. It was off his usual route, and there was no guarantee anyone would be there. But if someone was, if he could trade for a wagon, or even just some decent medical supplies, it was a long shot. But long shots were better than certain death. "Change of plans," he said when Leora woke. "We're making a detour." She didn't ask where, just nodded and let him help her back onto the horse. The trading post appeared around midday, a sagging structure that looked one strong wind away from collapse. But there was smoke coming from the chimney, which meant someone was inside. Rhett approached slowly, one hand near his rifle. "You didn't trust anyone out here. Trust got you killed." The door opened before he could dismount, and a man stepped out. Older, weathered, with the kind of beard that suggested he'd stopped caring about appearances years ago. He took in Rhett's group with one long look. "Hell of a cargo you got there," the man said. "Need supplies," Rhett replied. "Medicine if you got it. Food, water." "I got supplies. Question is what you're trading." Rhett had expected this. He'd brought furs, ammunition, a decent knife. Nothing spectacular, but enough to negotiate with. The man examined each item with the practiced eye of someone who'd been cheated before and didn't intend to be cheated again. "This'll get you some food," he said finally. "Maybe some bandages. Not much else." "What about a wagon? Or a cart?" The man laughed. "Not for this." Rhett's jaw tightened. "What would it take?" "More than you got." Behind him, Emma spoke up. "We have this." She was holding something, a small locket on a chain, gold or at least gold-plated. It was Mama's. From her mama before that. "Emma, no," Leora said, but her voice was weak. The man took the locket, examined it closely. "It's something," he admitted. "Not much, but something." "It's all we have," Emma said. She was looking at the man with those two old eyes. "Please." The man sighed, rubbed his face, looked at Rhett like this was somehow his fault. There's a cart out back, he said eventually. Barely holds together, but it'll carry weight better than your horse. Take it. And don't come back here asking for charity. This isn't charity, Rhett said. It's a trade. Keep telling yourself that. The man went inside and returned with supplies: salted meat, hardtack, a jar of honey, clean bandages, and a bottle of whiskey that he handed to Rhett with a meaningful look. For the pain, that look said. Or for mercy, if it comes to that. Rhett took it without comment. The cart was exactly as advertised, a ramshackle thing with wheels that squeaked and wood that groaned under pressure. But it was transport, and transport meant Leora could lie down instead of trying to stay upright in the saddle. They loaded her into the cart bed, padded with Rhett's bedroll and what little extra fabric they had. The girls climbed in beside her. Rhett hitched his horse to the cart, and they started moving again. Progress was slower now, but steadier. Leora could rest, the girls could sleep, and Rhett could think. He kept coming back to the same question. Why had he stopped? It wasn't sentiment. He'd lost that during the war, watching men die for causes they didn't understand. It wasn't heroism. Heroes were just fools who hadn't gotten killed yet. So what was it? Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just tired of being alone. The second night, they made camp near a dry creek bed. Rhett shot a rabbit and roasted it over the fire, and the smell of cooking meat made the girl's eyes go wide. He divided it into 4 portions, gave the largest to Leora. "You need it more," he said when she tried to protest. "You're the one doing all the work." "Work doesn't mean anything if you die." She ate. Slowly, like her stomach had forgotten how to process food, but she ate. The girls devoured their portions and looked hopefully at what remained. Rhett gave them what was left of his share. "You're going to starve yourself," Leora observed. "I've been hungrier." "When?" "War. Prison camp, specifically. They fed us enough to keep us breathing, but not enough to keep us strong. Figured if we were too weak to escape, we wouldn't try." He stared into the fire. "They were mostly right." "Mostly?" "I got out." "How?" Rhett's smile was humorless. "Wasn't pretty." Leora didn't push. She'd learned something about him in the past 2 days. When he went quiet, it meant the conversation had hit something he wasn't ready to discuss. Fair enough. She had her own silences. "Your husband," Rhett said after a while. "How'd he die?" "Fever. Same fever that probably should have killed me." Leora pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "We were heading west, California. Everyone said there were opportunities there, fresh starts." "You believe that?" "I wanted to." "And now?" "Now I think fresh starts are just old mistakes with new names." Rhett nodded. That tracked with his own experience. "So why keep going?" "Because stopping means dying, and I'm not ready for that yet." She looked at her daughters. "And because they deserve better than what I've given them so far." "You've kept them alive." "Barely, and only because you showed up." "Yeah, well." Rhett poked the fire with a stick. "Turns out I'm bad at minding my own business." Leora laughed. Actually laughed. Rough and genuine. Thank God for that. The third day, Leora's fever broke. Rhett noticed it first when he checked her bandages that morning. The swelling had gone down. The angry red color had faded to something closer to normal. Her skin was still hot, but it was regular heat now, not the dangerous burning that signaled systemic infection. "You might actually make it," he said. "Don't sound so surprised." "I am surprised. I've seen wounds like that kill grown men." "I'm not a man." "Clearly." "And I'm too mean to die." Rhett believed her. There was something in Leora that refused to quit, some fundamental stubbornness that kept her lungs filling and her heart beating even when everything else said, "Stop." He recognized it because he had the same thing. They reached his camp that afternoon. It wasn't much. A lean-to shelter against a rock face, a fire pit, some basic supplies cached in a waterproof container buried nearby. But it was shelter, and after 3 days of exposure, shelter felt like luxury. Rhett helped Leora into the lean-to and got her settled. The girls explored the camp with the cautious curiosity of children who'd been disappointed too many times to get excited about anything. "This is where you live?" Emma asked. "Sometimes. I move around a lot." "Why?" "Staying in one place too long makes you a target." "Target for what?" Rhett looked at her, this 7-year-old girl who'd already seen more than most adults could handle, and decided she deserved the truth. For anyone who wants to take what you have. Emma absorbed this. Is that what happened to the people who left us? Were they scared someone would take what they had? Maybe, or maybe they were just cowards. Mama says there's no such thing as cowards, just people who haven't been brave yet. Your mama's nicer than I am. I know. That night, Rhett cooked a proper meal, beans and rice and dried vegetables reconstituted in water from the creek. It wasn't fancy, but it was food, and there was enough of it that nobody had to go hungry. The girls ate until their stomachs bulged. Leora managed half a bowl before exhaustion claimed her. Rhett sat by the fire and tried to figure out what happened next. He couldn't keep them here indefinitely. Winter was coming, and this camp wasn't built for 4 people. They'd need more supplies, better shelter, a plan that extended beyond just surviving day to day. But where could they go? Leora was in no condition to travel far. The girls needed stability, schooling, community. And Rhett didn't know what he needed. You're thinking too loud, Leora said. She'd woken up and was watching him from the lean-to. I can hear you from here, trying to figure out the next move. And I don't have one yet. Leora was quiet for a moment. There's land about 30 miles north of here. My husband and I were going to stake a claim before he died. Free land if you're willing to work it. Homestead Act. Right. 160 acres if you can prove you're improving it. She paused. You ever think about settling down? No. Why not? Because settling down means putting down roots, and roots make you vulnerable, or they make you strong. Rhett looked at her. You really believe that? I don't know, Leora admitted, but I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of being afraid, and I think... She took a breath. I think maybe being scared of staying in one place is just another way of being a coward. Thought your mama said there's no such thing as cowards. My mama's dead, and I'm starting to think she might have been wrong about a few things. Rhett considered this, considered her, considered the 2 sleeping girls and the impossible weight of keeping them alive. This land you're talking about, he said. It claimed? Not yet. And you want to claim it. I want to try, but I can't do it alone. Leora met his eyes. I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm just asking you to help me get started. After that, you can leave. No obligations. It was a lie. They both knew it. If he helped her build something, he'd be invested, connected, responsible. All the things he'd spent the last 5 years avoiding. But the alternative was leaving. Dropping them at the nearest town and riding away. Going back to his solitary existence, his careful isolation, his practiced numbness. And somehow, that seemed harder than staying. 30 miles north, Rhett said, give or take, and you think you can homestead it, in your condition, with 2 children. I think I don't have better options, and neither do you. She was right about that. Rhett had been drifting since the war ended, moving from place to place, never settling, never connecting. It was safer that way, easier. But safe and easy were different words for lonely. All right, he heard himself say. We'll go look at this land, see if it's worth the trouble. Leora smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, hopeful. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. I haven't actually done anything. You stopped. That's more than anyone else did. Rhett didn't have an answer for that, so he just nodded and went back to watching the fire, trying not to think about what he'd just agreed to, trying not to think about how easy it had been to say yes, trying not to think about how, for the first time in years, he wasn't completely alone. The fire burned low. The stars came out. And somewhere in the darkness, something that might have been hope, or might have just been exhaustion, settled over the camp like a blanket. Tomorrow they'd head north. Tomorrow they'd see the land. Tomorrow they'd start figuring out if survival could become something more. But tonight, they were alive, fed, safe. And that was enough. They left at first light, when the air still held the night's chill, and the horizon was more suggestion than certainty. Rhett had spent the hours before dawn breaking camp with the methodical efficiency of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. The lean-to stayed. It was built into the rock face and would be there if he ever came back. Everything else got packed into the cart or strapped to his horse. Leora moved slower than she wanted to, her legs still protesting every shift of weight, But she was moving. That counted for something. She watched Rhett work and noticed things she hadn't seen before. The way he checked every knot twice. How he positioned supplies so the weight distributed evenly. The unconscious awareness he maintained of his surroundings. This wasn't a man who'd survived by accident. "You were a soldier," she said. Not a question. Rhett didn't look up from securing a water barrel. "Most men my age were." "That's not what I meant. You weren't just a soldier. You were good at it." Now he did look at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're still alive." Leora eased herself down onto a flat rock, conserving strength for the journey ahead. "And because you move like someone who expects trouble. Out here, you should always expect trouble." "That's not an answer." Rhett pulled the last knot tight and straightened. "I was a scout, cavalry division, spent most of the war behind enemy lines." "That sounds dangerous." It was. He moved to check the horse's shoes. But it was also simple. You had a mission. You completed it, or you died trying. Everything else was noise. And when the war ended, the noise got louder. He said it flatly, like he was commenting on the weather. But Leora heard what lived underneath the words. She'd met enough broken men to recognize one standing in front of her. The war had carved something out of Rhett Calder and never bothered to fill the space back in. Emma emerged from the lean-to then, Sarah trailing behind her like a shadow. Both girls looked better than they had 3 days ago, color returning to their cheeks, the hollow desperation fading from their eyes. They were still too thin, still carried themselves with that careful wariness of children who'd learned not to trust stability, but they were healing. "Are we leaving?" Emma asked. "We are," Rhett confirmed. "You girls remember how to ride?" Emma nodded. Sarah just pressed closer to her sister. "Good, because it's going to be a long day, and I need you both to be strong. Can you do that?" "We can be strong," Emma said, then quieter. "We've had practice." Something flickered across Rhett's face. Might have been sympathy, might have been recognition. He lifted both girls into the cart without another word, settling them beside their mother. Leora wrapped an arm around each daughter and felt the weight of them, solid and real and alive. 3 days ago, she'd been certain she'd never hold them again. "Thank you," she said to Rhett. He was already moving toward the horse. "Save it for when we get there." The journey north unfolded in the relentless rhythm of frontier travel. The creak of cartwheels, the steady plod of hooves, the sun climbing and burning and finally descending. The land changed gradually, the flat basin giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub pine and juniper. Creek beds appeared more frequently, most of them dry, but a few holding enough water to refill their supply. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat. Rhett rationed the food carefully, dividing hardtack and dried meat into portions that satisfied no one but kept everyone functional. Emma accepted her share without complaint. Sarah ate mechanically, her eyes distant. "She hasn't talked much," Leora said quietly, watching her youngest daughter. "Not since the wagon train left us. Some people process things by going quiet," Rhett said. "She'll talk when she's ready. And if she's not, what if she just stays like this?" "Then she stays like this. Can't force someone to heal faster than they're able." Leora wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her daughter needed intervention, needed something more than time and patience, but she recognized the truth in what Rhett said. Some wounds didn't show on the surface. Some took years to close, if they ever did. They traveled through the afternoon, the landscape continuing its subtle transformation. The hills grew more pronounced, the vegetation thicker. Rhett pointed out landmarks as they passed, a lightning-split tree, a formation of red rocks that looked like a broken tooth, a spring that ran clear even in drought years. "You know this area," Leora observed. "Came through here a few times. Never stayed long." "Why not?" Rhett was quiet for a moment, considering. "Didn't have a reason to." The unspoken words hung between them. "And now you do." Neither of them acknowledged it directly, but it was there, present and growing like the shadows as the sun dropped lower. They made camp that evening in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek that actually had water in it. Rhett insisted on scouting the perimeter before he'd let anyone settle in, disappearing into the twilight with his rifle and returning 20 minutes later. "Clear," he said. "No tracks, no fire pits. Nobody's been through here recently." "Is that good or bad?" Emma asked. She'd been helping her mother spread out bedrolls, moving with the careful competence of a child who'd grown up fast. Depends on your perspective. Means we're alone, which is safe. Also means if something goes wrong, there's nobody to help. Rhett started building a fire. But we'll be fine. I've camped in worse places. Like where? Swamps in Georgia. Mountains in Tennessee. Once spent 3 nights in a cave with a bear. Emma's eyes went wide. A real bear? Real as they come. Big black bear, probably weighed 500 pounds. I was trying to wait out a storm, didn't realize he was already in there until I was too far back to leave without walking past him. What did you do? Stayed very still and very quiet for 3 days. Ate my rations slow so the smell wouldn't bother him. When the storm passed, I waited for him to leave first. Were you scared? Rhett looked at her seriously. Terrified. Anyone who says they're not scared of a 500-pound bear is either lying or stupid. But you stayed anyway. Leaving would have gotten me killed. Sometimes the brave thing and the scared thing are the same thing. Emma absorbed this, and Leora watched her daughter's face shift as she processed the idea that courage and fear could coexist. It was a lesson Leora herself was still learning. The fire caught, flames licking upward into the gathering dark. Rhett filled a pot with creek water and set it to boil, adding rice and the last of a dried onion. The smell made Leora's stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring. How much further to the land? She asked. If we make good time tomorrow, we'll be there by evening. If we don't, the day after. Rhett stirred the pot. What's it like? This land. I don't know. My husband saw it once, said it had potential. Creek running through it, some timber, decent soil. But that was 2 years ago. Could have changed. Could have been claimed by someone else. Could have. And if it is, Leora met his eyes across the fire. Then we find different land. Just like that? Just like that. I'm not picky about location. I'm picky about survival. Rhett nodded slowly. All right then. We'll see what we see. They ate in relative silence, the meal filling empty spaces but not quite satisfying. After, Emma helped clean the pot while Sarah sat close to her mother, staring into the fire with that distant expression that had become familiar. Leora stroked her daughter's hair and hummed something low and tuneless, an old melody she couldn't quite remember the words to. My mother used to sing that, Rhett said suddenly. Leora stopped. This song? Something like it. Before the war, before everything. He was staring into the fire now too, seeing something that wasn't there. She died while I was gone. Fever, they said. By the time the letter reached me, she'd been in the ground for 6 months. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring anyone back. No, Leora agreed. But it acknowledges the loss. That matters. Does it? I think so. When my husband died, people stopped talking about him almost immediately, like he'd never existed, like mentioning him would make things worse. She kept stroking Sarah's hair. But forgetting someone doesn't make the pain go away. It just makes you alone with it. Rhett didn't respond, but his jaw tightened in a way that told Leora she'd hit something true. They sat in the complicated silence of two people who'd lost too much to pretend grief was simple. Emma broke the quiet. Tell us another story. About the war or after or anything. I don't have many good stories, Rhett said. Doesn't have to be good. Just has to be real. He considered this, then leaned back against a tree trunk. All right. After the war ended, I didn't go home right away. Didn't have a home to go to, really. My mother was dead, my father had died before the war even started, and our farm had been sold for back taxes. So I just wandered. Picked up work where I could find it. Cowhand, ranch security, freight guard, anything that paid enough to eat. That sounds lonely, Emma said. It was, but lonely felt safer than the alternative. What alternative? Caring about people. Soon as you care about someone, you give them the power to hurt you. And I'd been hurt enough. Emma frowned. But if you never care about anyone, aren't you just hurting yourself? Rhett looked at this 7-year-old girl who somehow understood things that grown men never figured out. Yeah, he said. I suppose you're right about that. So why do it? Do because I didn't know any better. And because knowing better doesn't always make it easier to change. Leora watched this exchange with something tight in her chest. Her daughter was trying to understand a broken man, and the broken man was being honest with her in a way most adults never managed. It was strange and fragile, and somehow exactly what they all needed. The fire burned lower. Emma yawned despite trying not to. Sarah had already fallen asleep against her mother's side, breathing deep and even. Rhett stood and checked the perimeter one more time, moving through the darkness like he was part of it. When he returned, Leora spoke quietly so as not to wake Sarah. "You don't have to keep watch all night. I can take a shift. You need rest more than I do. So do you. I'm used to not sleeping. You're not. Rhett." She waited until he looked at her. "I'm not fragile. Stop treating me like I might break. You almost died 3 days ago. Almost doesn't count. I'm here. I'm healing. And I can keep watch for a few hours while you sleep." They stared at each other across the dying fire, neither willing to back down. Finally, Rhett sighed. 4 hours, he said. "You wake me if anything seems wrong. Anything at all." "Deal." He handed her his rifle, showed her where the safety was, though she already knew, and settled himself against a tree with his hat pulled low. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out, though Leora suspected he wasn't fully asleep. Men like Rhett didn't know how to fully let their guard down. She kept watch through the deep hours of night, listening to the creak and the wind and the small sounds of animals moving through the brush. The rifle was heavy across her lap, solid and reassuring. She hadn't held a gun since her husband died. He'd been the one who handled such things. But the weight of it felt right. Necessary. This was her family now, these 2 sleeping girls and this broken man who'd chosen to stop when everyone else kept riding. She'd protect them however she could. When 4 hours had passed, she woke Rhett gently. He came alert immediately. No grogginess or confusion, just instant awareness. She handed him the rifle and lay down beside her daughters, pulling them close. "Nothing happened," she said. "Good." "Rhett?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For trusting me to keep watch." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for not breaking." It wasn't poetry, it wasn't romantic, but it was real, and that mattered more. Morning came cold and clear. They ate a quick breakfast of the previous night's leftover rice and broke camp with practiced efficiency. The routine was becoming familiar. Pack the cart, check the horse, distribute weight, move forward. Simple tasks that added up to survival. The land continued to change as they traveled north. The hills grew into something approaching mountains, though nothing like the towering peaks further west. Trees became more common, pine and aspen mixed with the cottonwoods. The air smelled different here, sharper and greener. Around midday, Rhett pulled the cart to a stop. "What is it?" Leora asked. He pointed ahead to where the trail forked. "Left goes toward the settlement at Bitter Creek. Might be 40, 50 people there. Right continues north toward the unclaimed land." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a choice. We could go to Bitter Creek. You could find work there, maybe a boarding house for you and the girls. It'd be safer than trying to homestead." Leora studied his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. "Is that what you think I should do?" "I think I don't get to make that decision for you." "But you have an opinion." "My opinion doesn't matter." "It does to me." Rhett looked uncomfortable with this admission. He shifted in the saddle, buying time. "Bitter Creek is safe. It's also small-minded and hard on outsiders, especially women alone. You'd spend the rest of your life at the mercy of people who judge every decision you make." "And the land? The land is dangerous. It's work that'll break your back and might not pay off. You could put in years of effort and lose everything to drought or disease or just bad luck. But it would be ours. Yeah, it would be yours." Leora didn't hesitate. "Then we go right." Emma, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "I want to go right too. I don't want to live somewhere where people are mean to Mama." Sarah, surprising everyone, nodded agreement. Rhett looked at all 3 of them, these stubborn survivors who'd chosen the harder path, and something in his expression softened. Right it is. They took the right fork. The trail became rougher, less traveled. Vegetation pressed in closer on both sides, and more than once Rhett had to dismount to clear fallen branches blocking the way. But the land grew more beautiful as they climbed, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, eagles circling overhead, the distant sound of running water constant and reassuring. Late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Rhett stopped again. There, he said, pointing. Below them spread a valley that looked like it had been waiting for someone to notice it. A creek ran through the center, wide enough to matter, but not so large it would flood dangerously. Trees clustered along the banks, providing timber and shade. The land rolled gently, good for crops in some places, grazing in others. Mountains rose in the distance, close enough to provide wind shelter, but far enough not to trap them. "Is that it?" Leora asked, barely breathing. "If your husband's description was accurate, yeah, that's it." They descended into the valley in silence, each of them taking in the reality of what they were seeing. It was wild land, untouched and unforgiving. It would take everything they had to make it work. But it was possible. Standing there looking at it, it was actually possible. Rhett drove the cart down to the creek and stopped. They all climbed out, even Sarah, and stood at the water's edge. "It's pretty," Emma said. "Pretty doesn't keep you alive," Rhett replied, but there was no harshness in it. "But yeah, it's pretty." Leora walked along the creek bank, her leg aching but holding. The water ran clear over smooth stones. Fish darted in the shallows. She knelt and dipped her hand in, letting the current flow over her fingers. "We could build here," she said. "Right near the water, cabin here, maybe a barn further up where the land flattens out. Garden plot on the south side where it gets the most sun." Rhett was walking the perimeter, his scout's eye assessing everything. "Soil's decent, not great but workable, plenty of timber. Creek won't dry up. You can tell by how the banks are worn it runs year-round." "So it's good land?" "It's land that could be good, with work." "How much work?" Rhett laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "More than you want to know right now. We'd need to clear the building site, fell trees for lumber, build shelter before winter. And winter comes early up here. We've got maybe 3 months if we're lucky." 3 months to build a cabin? 3 months to build something that won't kill you when the snow comes. It won't be fancy, won't even be comfortable, but it'll keep you alive. Leora looked at her daughters, who were throwing stones into the creek and watching the ripples spread. Looked at this wild valley that could become home or could become a grave. Looked at Rhett, this man who kept saying he wasn't staying but kept acting like he was. "Can we do it?" she asked. "I don't know. Never homesteaded before." "But you've built things, survived things." "That's different." "How?" Because I was only responsible for keeping myself alive. This is 4 people who will die if I screw up." "You won't screw up." "You don't know that." "I know you haven't screwed up yet. I know you found us when we were dying and didn't leave. I know you traded your supplies for a cart you didn't need. I know you keep watch at night and let me rest. I know—" Her voice cracked. "I know you're the first person in a very long time who's acted like my life matters." Rhett looked away, jaw working. "Don't make me into something I'm not." "I'm not. I'm seeing you exactly as you are." He didn't respond to that, just turned and walked back toward the creek, putting distance between them. Leora let him go. She was learning that Rhett needed space when emotions got too close to the surface. Emma appeared at her side. "Is he angry?" "No, sweetheart. He's scared." "Of what?" "Of caring, of staying, of all the things that could go wrong." "Are you scared?" Leora pulled her daughter close, terrified. "But we're staying anyway?" "We're staying anyway." That evening they made camp on what would become their land. Rhett shot a rabbit and roasted it over the fire. They ate with their hands, tearing off pieces of meat that burned their fingers, and tasted better than anything Leora could remember. After dinner, Rhett pulled out a piece of paper and a stub of pencil. "We need a plan. Can't just start building random things and hope it works out." "What kind of plan?" Leora asked. "First priority is shelter. Something basic but solid. Walls, roof, door that closes. It doesn't need to be big. 1 room for now. We can expand later if we make it through winter." "When you say we, do you mean—" I'll help you build it. After that, we'll see." It wasn't a commitment, but it wasn't a rejection either. Leora accepted it. They spent the next hour sketching out a rough design. The cabin would be small, maybe 12 feet by 14, notched log construction because it was fastest. A single window on the south side for light and ventilation. Roof made from split logs covered with sod for insulation. A stone fireplace in the corner for heat and cooking. "How long to build something like this?" Leora asked. If we work dawn to dusk and the weather holds, 6 weeks, maybe 8. That includes felling the trees, stripping the bark, letting them season a bit. Rhett tapped the pencil against the paper. You and the girls will have to help. I can't do it alone. We'll help. It won't be easy. Logging is brutal work even for men who've done it their whole lives. We'll manage. Rhett studied her in the firelight. You really believe that, don't you? That you can just will yourself through anything? I don't have the luxury of believing anything else. He nodded slowly. All right, then tomorrow we start marking trees. They slept that night under stars that seemed closer here, brighter. Leora lay between her daughters and listened to the creek and thought about everything that had to happen before winter. It should have been overwhelming. It probably was overwhelming, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, maybe. Direction. Beside her, Sarah stirred and spoke for the first time in days. Mama? Leora's breath caught. Yes, baby? Is this home now? Do you want it to be? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think so. Then yes, this is home now. Sarah snuggled closer and fell back asleep. Across the fire, Rhett was pretending not to have heard the exchange, but Leora saw the way his shoulders had relaxed slightly. He'd needed to hear that too, needed to know this insane gamble meant something to someone. Morning brought reality in the form of blisters and aching muscles. Rhett had them up before dawn, eating a cold breakfast of hardtack while he explained the day's work. First, we mark the trees we'll cut. Need straight trunks, relatively few branches, diameter of at least a foot. Pine's best, easier to work than hardwood, and the resin helps seal gaps. They spent the morning walking the valley, Rhett making notches in bark while Emma and Sarah counted. By noon, they'd marked 40 trees, which Rhett said was enough for walls and roof, with some extra for mistakes. Now comes the hard part, he said. He wasn't lying. Felling trees with a single axe and no experience was brutal. Rhett handled most of the actual cutting, his strokes efficient and measured. But between trees, he showed Leora how to hold the axe, how to read the grain, how to aim for the notch instead of just swinging hard. Her first attempt was pathetic. The axe bounced off the trunk and nearly flew out of her hands. You're fighting it, Rhett said. The axe wants to fall. Let gravity do the work. You just guide it. She tried again, better, but still clumsy. Again, and again, and again. By the time the sun started dropping, Leora had managed to chop through a tree barely 8 inches in diameter. Her hands were raw, her shoulders screaming, but she'd done it. Not bad, Rhett said, which from him was high praise. They'd felled 6 trees total that first day. It didn't seem like much looking at the marked forest around them, but Rhett assured her it was good progress. We'll get faster. Your body'll adapt. And once we have enough timber down, we can focus on stripping and notching while a few more season. That night, Leora couldn't lift her arms high enough to brush her own hair. Emma had to help her, gentle fingers working through the tangles while Leora tried not to wince. Does it hurt a lot? Emma asked. Some. Is it worth it? Leora looked at their campfire, at the valley spreading out around them, at Rhett sharpening his axe with steady practice movements. Ask me again in 6 weeks. The days began to blur together in the way hard work makes time disappear. Up before dawn, quick breakfast, work until the light failed. Rhett felled trees with methodical efficiency, while Leora learned to strip bark using a draw knife he fashioned from an old piece of metal. The girls helped where they could, gathering kindling, hauling water, picking rocks from what would become the cabin floor. Sarah talked more now. Not constantly, but enough that Leora stopped worrying quite so intensely. Emma took to the work with surprising determination, her small hands learning to tie knots and stack branches with increasing skill. You're a natural, Rhett told her one afternoon after she'd successfully helped him rig a pulley system for moving logs. Emma beamed. Really? Really, you've got good hands and a good head. Keep that combination and you'll be fine. It was the most effusive praise Leora had ever heard from him. Emma glowed for the rest of the day. 2 weeks in, they'd cleared enough timber and started the actual construction. Rhett had Leora and the girls help him lay out the foundation. Rocks from the creek stacked and leveled to keep the logs off the ground and prevent rot. This part's important, he said. Foundation's off. Everything above it will be crooked. Take your time. Do it right. They took their time. The foundation alone took 3 days of careful adjustment and modification. But when it was done, it was level and solid. The first wall went up and Leora cried. She couldn't help it. Seeing those logs notched together, seeing the actual physical evidence that they were building something, it overwhelmed her. Emma hugged her waist and Sarah pressed against her side, and they stood there crying together while Rhett pretended to be very interested in checking his measurements. When Leora finally composed herself, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize. You're entitled to feel things. Even when there's work to do? Especially then." They kept building. The fourth wall proved to be the breaking point. They'd been working for nearly a month straight, every muscle screaming, every joint protesting, and the logs for the fourth wall were heavier than the others. Or maybe they were just that much more exhausted. Rhett had the last log positioned on his shoulder, Leora steadying the base, when his foot caught on a root he should have seen. The log shifted, Rhett stumbled, and for one terrible moment the entire thing was coming down on top of him. Leora screamed and shoved Emma backward, just as the log crashed to the ground, missing Rhett's leg by inches. He landed hard on his side, the wind knocked out of him, cursing in a way that would have been impressive if it wasn't so concerning. "Are you hurt?" Leora dropped beside him, hands already checking for brakes. "I'm fine." He pushed himself up, wincing. "Just bruised my pride along with everything else." "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Rhett got to his feet slowly, testing his weight. His left ankle protested, but held. "We'll take a break. 30 minutes. We should take longer than that." "We don't have longer than that. Look at the sky." Leora looked. The blue had gone pale at the edges, and there was something in the air, a sharpness that hadn't been there a week ago. Autumn was pressing in harder each day, warning them that winter wasn't a distant threat anymore. They ate dried meat and stale bread in silence, too tired for conversation. Sarah had fallen asleep against a pile of bark scraps. Emma was methodically rubbing salve into her mother's blistered hands, her small face serious with concentration. "How much longer?" Emma asked. "Until the cabin's done." Rhett looked at the 3 walls standing and the scattered logs that would become the fourth. 2 weeks if we push hard. 3 if we're realistic. And then what? Then we build a door, chink the gaps, get the roof on. After that, we focus on stockpiling firewood and food before the first snow. That's a lot. Yeah. Can we do it? Rhett glanced at Leora, who was staring at her ruined hands like they belonged to someone else. We're going to have to. They went back to work after the break, lifting that same log again with renewed caution. This time it settled into place correctly, the notches locking together with a satisfying thunk. Leora felt a small surge of victory that immediately dissolved into awareness of how much remained. That night she couldn't sleep. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't quiet, running through everything that could go wrong. They were gambling everything on a timeline that allowed no room for error. One injury, one early storm, one miscalculation, and they'd be caught in a half-built cabin when winter arrived. She must have been moving restlessly because Rhett's voice came out of the darkness. "You need to sleep." "I know." "But you're not going to." Apparently not. She heard him shift position, saw his silhouette sit up against the stars. "What's keeping you awake?" "Everything, nothing, the usual." "That's not helpful." Leora sat up too, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. The night was cold enough now that their breath showed faintly in the firelight. "What if we don't finish in time?" "Then we winter in a half-built cabin and probably freeze to death." "That's comforting." "You wanted honesty." "I wanted reassurance." "I don't deal in reassurance. I deal in reality." Rhett poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "But the reality is we're making progress. We haven't quit. We haven't died. Those are both good signs. The bar for success seems very low. Out here it is." He looked at her across the flames. "You're doing better than you think. Most people would have given up by now." "I don't have the option of giving up." "Everyone has that option. You're just not taking it." Leora pulled the blanket tighter. "When you were in the war, did you ever think about quitting?" "Every single day." "But you didn't." "No. Because quitting meant dying or deserting, and I wasn't ready for either." He paused. "There was this one time, we'd been behind enemy lines for 3 weeks, No resupply, no backup, living off whatever we could scavenge. My partner got shot. Nothing fatal, but bad enough he couldn't walk. We were 40 miles from friendly territory. What did you do? Carried him, 40 miles on foot with a full-grown man on my back and enemy patrols everywhere. Took 6 days. By the end of it, I was hallucinating from exhaustion and blood loss. I'd gotten shot too, but didn't realize it until day 3. That's horrible. It was necessary. He would have done the same for me. Rhett stared into the fire. Point is, you don't survive impossible things by thinking about how impossible they are. You survive by doing the next small thing, and then the next, until suddenly you're on the other side. And if you don't make it to the other side, then at least you tried. At least you didn't just lie down and wait to die. Leora thought about this, about the wagon wheel her former companions had left her beside, about how close she'd come to accepting that death was inevitable, about the fact that she was still here, still breathing, still building. Thank you, she said. For what? For carrying us the same way you carried your partner. Rhett looked uncomfortable. It's not the same, isn't it? You found us dying and decided we were worth the effort of keeping alive. You've been carrying us ever since. I'm not carrying you. You're walking on your own. Only because you helped me stand up first. He didn't have an answer for that. Just shook his head and lay back down, pulling his hat over his face to signal the conversation was over. But Leora saw the way his shoulders had tensed, the way he'd turned slightly away. She'd gotten too close again. Acknowledged something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The next morning brought the first real cold snap. They woke to frost on the ground and their water barrel frozen at the surface. Rhett broke the ice with his knife handle, and they shared the frigid water for breakfast, everyone shivering. Winter's coming faster than I thought, Rhett said, breath misting. We need to finish the cabin this week. Not next week. This week. Is that possible? Leora asked. It has to be. They worked like demons for the next 7 days. Up before dawn, working past dark by firelight when necessary. Rhett drove them all hard, but drove himself harder, his hands bleeding from rope burns and splinters that he didn't bother treating. Leora's leg throbbed constantly, but she ignored it, focusing on the next log, the next gap to fill, the next task. Emma and Sarah hauled rocks for the fireplace until their arms shook. They gathered moss for chinking. They held tools and fetched water and never once complained, even when exhaustion made them clumsy. The walls went up, the roof beams settled into place. They split logs for the roof covering and layered them carefully, overlapping like scales. Over that went sod they'd cut from the valley floor, heavy and awkward, but essential for insulation. On the 6th day, Rhett built the door. Rough planks held together with crossbeams and leather hinges that would need replacing eventually, but would work for now. He hung it in the frame and it actually closed, actually latched. They had a cabin. It wasn't beautiful. The logs were uneven in places. The door hung slightly crooked, and daylight showed through gaps they hadn't chinked properly yet. But it had 4 walls, a roof, and a fireplace. It would keep the wind out and the heat in. Leora stood in the doorway that evening and felt something crack open in her chest. This structure that hadn't existed 6 weeks ago, built by hands that had been soft and useless, was real, was theirs. It's not much, Rhett said from behind her. It's everything. That night they slept inside for the first time. The space felt both too big and too small simultaneously. They'd laid pine boughs on the floor for bedding, and the smell filled the cabin with something sharp and clean. The fireplace drew properly, smoke rising through the chimney Rhett had constructed with painstaking care. Sarah curled up next to Emma, both girls asleep almost instantly. Leora sat with her back against the wall, just looking at the space they'd created. You should rest, Rhett said. He'd taken the position by the door, rifle across his lap, even though they were indoors now. I will, in a minute. She watched the firelight play across the log walls. I keep thinking about the wagon train, the people who left us. What about them? I wonder if they made it to California, if they found what they were looking for. Does it matter? I don't know. Maybe I just want to believe that voting to leave a dying woman and her children bothers them sometimes, that they think about us and feel something. They don't, Rhett said flatly. People like that justify their choices immediately and never look back. They're probably telling themselves they did you a favor, that you would have slowed them down and gotten everyone killed. That's dark. It's true. I've seen it 100 times. People do terrible things and then convince themselves they had no choice. He shifted the rifle. But here's the thing, they don't matter anymore. You survived without them. You built something they'll never have. A cabin in the middle of nowhere? A home you made yourself. That's more than most people ever get. Leora looked at him, this man who kept deflecting gratitude but kept showing up anyway. Do you think of this as home? The question hung in the air between them. Rhett was very still, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. I don't know what home means anymore, he said finally. The place I grew up is gone. The people are dead. I've been moving for so long that staying still feels wrong. But you're still here, for now. Rhett, don't. He said it quietly but firmly. Don't ask me to promise something I can't deliver. I said I'd help you build shelter, and I did. The rest, I don't know. Leora wanted to push, wanted to demand clarity, wanted to make him admit that he was as invested in this as they were. But she'd learned that pushing Rhett only made him retreat further. All right, she said instead. Thank you for what you've given us, however long it lasts. He nodded once, sharp and brief, and went back to watching the door. The next week they focused on preparing for winter in earnest. Rhett showed Leora how to set snares for rabbits and how to smoke the meat so it would keep. They dug a root cellar near the cabin, lining it with rocks and covering it with logs and earth for insulation. Emma and Sarah helped gather every edible thing they could find: nuts, berries, wild onions, roots that Rhett identified as safe. The stockpile grew slowly. Leora tried not to think about whether it would be enough. They also started on a barn, though barn was generous. It was really just a 3-sided structure big enough to shelter Rhett's horse and store firewood. But it went up faster than the cabin had. They knew what they were doing now, their hands competent instead of fumbling. We should get more animals, Leora said one afternoon while they were stacking wood. Chickens, at least. Maybe a cow if we can afford one. With what money? I don't know. We'll figure something out. Rhett gave her a look. You can't just figure out livestock. Why not? We figured out how to build a cabin. How hard can chickens be? Chickens are demons with feathers, and you'll regret them immediately. You seem very passionate about this. I grew up on a farm. I know what I'm talking about. But there was something almost fond in his voice, like the memory wasn't entirely terrible. They kept working. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Frost became a permanent fixture. The creek started developing ice along the edges in the mornings, though it still ran freely by afternoon. Then the first snow came. It started late one evening, fat flakes drifting down lazy and almost gentle. By morning, the valley was blanketed in white. Everything softened and muffled. The girls were delighted, running outside to catch snowflakes and make small snowmen. Leora stood in the doorway and felt the weight of winter settling in. How deep will it get? She asked Rhett. Hard to say. Could be a few feet. Could be more. He was checking their firewood supply, mentally calculating. We'll need to ration carefully. Make sure we're not burning through wood faster than we can replenish it. Will we make it? Ask me in the spring. The snow melted after 2 days, but the message was clear. Winter was here, and they were locked in now. No leaving, no resupply, no rescue if things went wrong. They had what they had, and it would either be enough or it wouldn't. Life settled into a different rhythm. They couldn't work on construction in the heavy snow, so instead they focused on maintenance and survival. Rhett spent hours each day checking the snares and cutting firewood. Leora worked on improving the cabin's insulation, stuffing gaps with moss and mud that froze solid. The girls learned to card wool from old scraps and twist it into rough yarn. The close quarters forced an intimacy none of them were quite prepared for. There was nowhere to have privacy, nowhere to escape when tensions rose. They learned each other's habits and irritations, Rhett's need for silence in the mornings, Leora's tendency to hum when she was anxious, Emma's habit of asking questions when everyone was trying to sleep, Sarah's nightmares that woke them all. They learned to navigate around each other, to give space even when there was none, to know when to talk and when to stay quiet. One night, about 3 weeks into winter, a storm hit that made the previous snow look gentle. The wind howled like something alive and furious, battering the cabin walls with enough force that Leora worried they might collapse. Snow came down so thick they couldn't see past the window. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the door. They huddled around the fireplace, burning wood faster than was wise but too cold to care. Sarah was shaking despite being wrapped in every blanket they had. Emma pressed against her mother's side, eyes wide and scared. "Is the cabin going to hold?" Leora asked Rhett quietly. "It held this long." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." The storm lasted 2 days. 2 days of howling wind and driving snow and cold so intense it hurt to breathe. They ran through more firewood than Rhett wanted, burned through food they couldn't afford to waste, and by the end of it, everyone was hollow-eyed and exhausted. But the cabin held. When the storm finally broke and they could open the door, snow had drifted up to the roof on the north side. The barn structure had partially collapsed under the weight. 3 of their snares had been destroyed, but they were alive, and the cabin was intact. "We made it," Leora said, staring at the devastation. "We made it through one storm," Rhett corrected. "There'll be more." He was right. Winter that year was relentless, throwing storm after storm at them, like it was testing their resolve. Each one they survived felt like a small miracle, but the cumulative effect was wearing them down. Their food supplies shrank faster than anticipated. Firewood became a constant concern. The cold was a presence they could never escape, seeping into their bones and staying there. Leora's legs started bothering her again, the old injury aching in the cold. She tried to hide it, but Rhett noticed. "You need to stay off it more," he said. "Can't. Too much work to do." "Leora, don't. I know my own limits." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to push yourself into a relapse." "Then look somewhere else." They glared at each other across the cabin, the tension that had been building for weeks suddenly right there on the surface. Emma and Sarah had gone very quiet, watching their mother and Rhett with the careful attention of children who'd learned to read adult moods for signs of danger. "Fine," Rhett said eventually. "Break yourself. See if I care." He grabbed his coat and went outside, slamming the door hard enough to make snow fall from the roof. Leora sat down heavily, her leg throbbing. Emma crawled into her lap even though she was getting too big for it. "Are you mad at each other?" she asked. "Just frustrated. It's been a long winter. He's scared you're going to get hurt." "I know." "Are you going to get hurt?" Leora hugged her daughter close. "I'm going to do everything I can not to." Rhett stayed outside for 2 hours, coming back cold and silent and refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable quiet, everyone too aware of the argument hanging unresolved between them. That night, after the girls were asleep, Leora spoke into the darkness. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being stubborn. For not listening." Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry for walking out and for slamming the door." "You were angry." "I was scared. I saw my mother work herself to death trying to keep the farm running after my father died. She wouldn't rest, wouldn't ask for help, just kept pushing until her body gave out." His voice was rough. "I don't want to watch that happen again." "I'm not your mother." "I know, but you're just as stubborn. Is that really such a bad thing? If I wasn't stubborn, I would have died when the wagon train left. I would have given up a dozen times since then." There's a difference between being stubborn enough to survive and being stubborn enough to kill yourself. Leora didn't have a good counter to that. "I'll be more careful. I promise." "You better. Because if you die, I'm stuck raising 2 children by myself, and I have no idea how to do that." It was said lightly, almost joking, but Leora heard what lived underneath. He was acknowledging a future, a possibility of staying even if something happened to her. It wasn't a declaration or a commitment, but it was something. "You'd be fine," she said. You've kept us alive this long." "We've kept each other alive. That's different." "Is it?" "Yeah, because if it was just me, I could quit, but it's not just me anymore." The words hung there, heavy with implication. Neither of them pushed further. Just let the truth of it settle like snow accumulating outside. The winter continued its assault. More storms, more cold, more days when getting out of bed felt like the hardest thing any of them had ever done. But they endured. They woke up each morning and fed the fire and rationed the food and made it through another day. Small moments of light appeared in the darkness. Emma teaching Sarah how to make shapes with string. Rhett carving small wooden animals for the girls when he thought no one was watching. Leora discovering she could make something almost like bread from their dwindling flour supply. The 4 of them huddled around the fire at night, telling stories to pass the time. "Tell us about before," Emma said one evening. "Before the war. When you were little." Rhett looked reluctant, but the girls were watching him with such hopeful expressions that he relented. "There's not much to tell. We had a farm in Missouri, grew corn mostly, some wheat, had chickens." "I thought you hated chickens," Emma interrupted. "I do. They're terrible creatures with no redeeming qualities." But he was almost smiling. "We also had a dog. Big stupid thing named Duke who couldn't hurt anything but thought he was essential to the operation." "What happened to him?" "Died of old age before I left for the war. He was already ancient when I was born." Rhett stared into the fire. "My mother used to make these pies every Sunday. Apple when we had apples, berry when we didn't, sometimes just sugar pie when there was nothing else. She'd set them on the windowsill to cool, and Duke would sit there staring at them, like if he wanted it badly enough, the pie would just jump into his mouth." "Did it work?" Sarah asked. "Never. But he tried every single week for 15 years. The girls giggled, and even Leora smiled. It was strange hearing Rhett talk about his past, seeing glimpses of the person he'd been before the war carved pieces out of him. "Your turn," he said to Leora. "Tell us something." "Like what?" "Anything. Something from before." Leora thought about it. Most of her memories from before felt distant now, belonging to a different person entirely. "My mother was a midwife. Started teaching me when I was Emma's age. By the time I was 12, I was assisting with births." "Was it scary?" Emma asked. "Sometimes. Birth is dangerous. Things can go wrong very quickly." Leora pulled her daughters closer. "But it was also beautiful. Being there when a new person entered the world, seeing mothers hold their babies for the first time. It made you believe in things." "What things?" "New beginnings, second chances, the possibility that something good could come from pain." The cabin went quiet after that, everyone lost in their own thoughts about pain and possibility, and the strange path that had brought them all to this small room in the middle of winter. Outside, the wind picked up again, another storm rolling in, but inside they were warm and together and still breathing. That was enough. That had to be enough. The thaw came gradually, then all at once. For weeks, the temperature had hovered just below freezing, keeping everything locked in ice and snow. Then one morning, Leora woke to the sound of water dripping from the roof, a steady rhythm that meant the worst had passed. She lay there listening to it, hardly daring to believe winter might actually be ending. Rhett was already up, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, surveying the damage. Snow still covered most of the valley, but patches of brown earth were beginning to show through. The creek had swollen with meltwater, running fast and loud. "We made it," Leora said, joining him. "Almost. Still got a few weeks before we're clear." But there was something different in his voice. Relief, maybe? Or something close to it. They'd survived on less than Rhett had calculated they'd need. The last 2 weeks had been particularly lean, portions so small they barely qualified as meals. Everyone had lost weight, their faces hollowed out and sharp. But they'd made it. That was what mattered. The girls emerged from their blankets, drawn by the sound of dripping water and the promise of warmth. Sarah went straight to the window, pressing her face against the glass. "Can we go outside?" she asked. "Not yet," Rhett said. "Ground's still too soft. You'll sink up to your knees in mud." "When?" "When I say so." Sarah accepted this without argument. The winter had taught them all patience, whether they wanted to learn it or not. Over the next few days, the thaw accelerated. Water ran everywhere, off the roof, through new channels carved in the earth, pooling in low spots that hadn't existed before. The barn structure they'd built had completely collapsed under the accumulated snow, and several of their winter supplies had gotten wet and ruined. But the cabin stood solid, and that was the victory that mattered most. Rhett spent those first warm days assessing what needed repair and what needed rebuilding. The list was long and daunting. Leora watched him make notes on a piece of bark with a charcoal stick and tried not to think about how much work still lay ahead. "We need to plant soon," she said, "if we're going to have any crops this year." "I know, but the ground needs to dry out first. Can't plant in mud." "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. "And what do we eat until then?" Rhett looked at her, and she saw her own worry reflected back. "We hunt, we forage, we make do." Making do had become their expertise. That afternoon, Rhett took Emma with him to check the snare lines while Leora and Sarah worked on cleaning the cabin. Months of close living had created a layer of grime and smoke residue on everything. They scrubbed the floor with melted snow water and sand, aired out the blankets, tried to make their small space feel less oppressive. When Rhett and Emma returned, they had 3 rabbits and a grouse. Rhett showed Emma how to clean them properly, walking her through each step without flinching from the bloody reality of it. "You need to know this," he told her. "Can't rely on someone else to do it for you." Emma's hands were shaking, but she followed his instructions, cutting where he indicated, pulling out organs she'd never seen before. When it was done and the meat was ready for cooking, she looked pale but proud. "I did it," she said to her mother. "You did." Leora hugged her, not caring about the blood on her daughter's hands. "I'm proud of you." That night, they ate the first fresh meat they'd had in weeks. It tasted better than anything Leora could remember, or maybe they were just that hungry. Either way, the meal felt like a celebration. As the days warmed further, they gradually expanded their range beyond the immediate area around the cabin. Rhett walked the property boundaries, making sure no one had moved in during winter to dispute their claim. Leora foraged for early spring greens, anything that might supplement their diet. The girls collected eggs from a wild bird's nest, triumphant over their small treasure. 2 weeks after the thaw began, Rhett declared the ground ready for planting. "We don't have much for seed," Leora said, looking at their meager supply. "And I don't know what grows well here. Potatoes are reliable. Beans, if we're lucky. Maybe some squash." Rhett surveyed the area they'd designated for the garden. "It's not going to be much this first year, but it's a start." They spent 3 days preparing the soil, breaking up earth that was harder than expected, removing rocks that seemed to multiply overnight, creating rows that Rhett measured and remeasured until they were straight enough to satisfy him. Planting itself was backbreaking work. Bend, dig, plant, cover, move down the row, repeat. Leora's leg ached constantly, but she kept going, unwilling to slow down when they'd finally reached this point. Emma and Sarah helped, their small hands more careful with the seeds than adult hands might have been. By evening of the 3rd day, they had 6 rows of potatoes, 4 of beans, and 3 of squash planted. It looked pitifully small in the vast expanse of valley, but it represented hope in a tangible form. "Now we wait," Rhett said, wiping dirt from his hands. "How long until we know if anything grows? Potatoes you'll see in a couple weeks, beans faster, squash takes longer." He looked at the neat rows with something that might have been satisfaction. "Assuming we don't get a late frost that kills everything." "You're terrible at optimism." "I prefer to call it realistic." The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm, different from winter's survival mode, but no less demanding. Mornings were for maintenance and repair, fixing the barn structure, patching the cabin's roof where snow had damaged it, repairing tools that had broken during winter. Afternoons were for hunting, foraging, and checking the garden for any sign of growth. The first potato shoots appeared on a morning when Leora had almost given up hope. Tiny green stems pushing through the soil, fragile but determined. She called the girls over to see, and they all stood there staring at those small plants like they were witnessing a miracle. "They're growing," Sarah said, wonder in her voice. "They are." Leora felt something unknot in her chest. "They're actually growing." More shoots appeared over the following days. The beans sprouted faster than the potatoes, their leaves unfurling in the sun. Even the squash began showing signs of life, though slower and more reluctant. Rhett built a fence around the garden to keep out deer and rabbits, driving stakes into the ground and stringing together whatever materials he could find. It was crude but functional, and it meant their crops had a fighting chance. "You know about farming," Leora observed one afternoon while they worked together on reinforcing a weak section of fence. "Some. My family had a farm, remember?" "But you said you hated it." "I hated chickens. Farming itself was fine." He secured another stake. "Predictable. You put in the work, you got results. Not like war where you could do everything right and still die." "Do you miss it, the farm life?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the simplicity, knowing what each day would bring. Having a place that was mine." He looked around the valley. "But that life's gone. Can't go back to it even if I wanted to." "You could build something new." "Maybe." It wasn't a commitment, but it wasn't a denial either. Leora was learning to recognize these small shifts in Rhett's thinking, the gradual erosion of his defenses. Early summer brought new challenges. The garden needed constant attention, watering during dry spells, weeding to prevent the crops from being choked out, watching for pests that could destroy everything overnight. Rhett shot a deer that had jumped the fence and was trampling the beans, and while the meat was welcome, the loss of several plants stung. They also had to start thinking about the next winter, an exercise that made Leora tired just considering it. More firewood to cut and stack, more food to preserve, repairs to complete before cold weather returned. The list was endless. One evening, after a particularly long day, Leora sat outside the cabin watching the sun set behind the mountains. Her hands were raw from working, her back ached, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly rested. But the valley was beautiful in the fading light, and the garden showed rows of healthy green plants, and the cabin stood solid behind her. Rhett came out and sat beside her without saying anything. They'd gotten comfortable with these silences, the kind that didn't need filling. "I've been thinking," Leora said eventually. "Dangerous." "I'm serious. We need to make this official. File the homestead claim properly. Make sure no one can take this from us." "That means going to town. Nearest land office is probably 3 days' ride." "I know, but we have to do it. Otherwise, we're just squatters who could be forced off at any time." Rhett nodded slowly. "You're right. We should go soon before summer gets too hot for travel." "We? You think I'm letting you ride 3 days alone? You'd probably fall off the horse and break your other leg." "I'm perfectly capable. I know you are. I'm still coming." Leora looked at him, at the stubborn set of his jaw, and the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "What about the girls? We can't take them. It's too far." "They'll stay here. Emma's old enough to manage for a few days if we leave them supplied." The idea made Leora's stomach clench. Leaving her daughters alone, even in a place they'd made relatively safe, felt wrong. But Rhett was right that the claim needed filing, and bringing 2 children on a 6-day round trip would be harder than leaving them. "I don't like it," she said. "Neither do I, but it's necessary." They spent the next week preparing. Rhett taught Emma how to use the rifle, making her practice until she could reliably hit a target. Leora went over every possible emergency scenario with both girls, drilling them on what to do if someone came, if there was a fire, if they got hurt. "We'll be fine, Mama," Emma said, exasperated after the 5th repetition. "You're treating us like babies. You're 7 and 5, almost 8 and 6, and we're not stupid." "I know you're not. I just—" Leora pulled both girls close. "I just need you to be safe." Sarah hugged her mother tight. "We'll be safe. We promise." The morning they left felt wrong from the start. Leora kept looking back at the cabin, at her daughters standing in the doorway trying to be brave. Emma had her arms around Sarah, and both girls were waving like this was an adventure instead of a calculated risk. "They'll be fine," Rhett said for the 3rd time. "You don't know that." "No. But worrying the whole way there won't change anything." He was right, which didn't make it easier. Leora forced herself to face forward and keep riding. The journey to town was harder than Leora expected. She'd gotten used to the valley, to their small, controlled world. Being out in open territory again felt exposing and dangerous. Every rider they passed could be a threat. Every settlement they skirted might have people who'd recognize her, who'd remember the wagon train that left a woman and children to die. Rhett seemed to sense her tension. No one's going to recognize you. And if they do, what are they going to say? They're the ones who should be ashamed. Should be isn't the same as are. True enough. They made camp the first night in a shallow canyon, Rhett choosing the spot with the same careful attention he gave everything. Leora helped build the fire, her hands moving through familiar motions that soothed some of her anxiety. "Tell me about the land office," she said. "What do we need to do?" "File a claim for 160 acres. Provide proof we're improving the land. The cabin counts for that. Pay a small filing fee." Rhett poked the fire. "Then we have 5 years to prove up the claim. Build a permanent residence, cultivate a certain percentage of the land, live there continuously. And if we do all that, the land becomes ours, free and clear." The concept was almost impossible to grasp. Land that belonged to them, that no one could take away. After months of uncertainty and survival, the idea of permanence felt radical. 5 years, Leora repeated. "That's a long time." It's also not that long. Depends on your perspective. Which perspective do you have? Rhett was quiet, staring into the flames. I'm working on figuring that out. They reached the town late afternoon of the third day. It was bigger than Leora expected. Maybe 200 people, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent. The land office was a small structure near the center, officiated by a man who looked bored until they walked in. Help you? He asked, not particularly interested. We need to file a homestead claim, Rhett said. The man pulled out forms, his movements slow and bureaucratic. Location? Rhett provided coordinates, landmarks, boundaries. The man wrote it all down in careful script. Improvements made to date? Cabin, 12 by 14, log construction, garden plot, outbuildings. How long you been on the land? Since last fall. The man looked up, studying them both. You made it through winter up there? In a cabin you built yourself? We did. Something shifted in the man's expression. Maybe respect. Maybe just surprise that they were still alive. All right then. Filing fee is $12. Proof-up deadline is 5 years from today's date. You'll need to show continuous residence and cultivation. Failure to meet requirements means you lose the claim. Rhett counted out $12. More money than Leora had seen in months. The man stamped the forms, made copies in a large ledger, handed them a certificate. Land's yours, he said, assuming you don't die or give up. We won't, Leora said. The man shrugged like he'd heard that before from people who didn't make it. But the certificate was real in her hands, official and binding. They owned the land. Or they would if they survived 5 more years. They spent the night in town at a boarding house. The first real bed Leora had slept in since before the wagon train. It felt strange and too soft, and she barely slept. Rhett had taken a separate room, maintaining the careful propriety they'd established despite months of close quarters. In the morning, they resupplied seeds for next year's planting, some basic tools, salt and flour, and other staples they couldn't produce themselves. It depleted their remaining money, but the supplies were necessary. As they were loading the horse, a woman approached. She was maybe 40, well-dressed by frontier standards, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Excuse me," she said. "I couldn't help but overhear at the land office yesterday. You're homesteading north of here?" "That's right," Leora said, immediately wary. "Alone? Just the two of you?" Rhett's hand had moved closer to his rifle. "Why do you ask?" "Because I run a trading cooperative. Homesteaders pool resources, trade goods, help each other during difficult times. I thought you might be interested." Leora exchanged a glance with Rhett. "What kind of help?" "Tools, labor, knowledge. Someone needs a barn raised. Everyone comes to help. Someone has extra seed. They share. Winter's hard on everyone. It's less hard when you're not facing it alone." It sounded too good to be true, which usually meant it was. But the woman's face was open, honest, and something in Leora wanted to believe community still existed somewhere. "Well, think about it," she said. The woman handed her a folded paper. "Meeting schedule and locations. Come to one if you're interested. No obligation." They rode out shortly after, leaving the town behind. Leora kept the paper, though she wasn't sure she'd ever use it. "You think it's real?" she asked Rhett. "The cooperative? Maybe. Or maybe it's a way to scope out homesteaders and figure out who's worth robbing. That's dark. It's possible. Do you trust anyone?" Rhett considered this. "I'm learning to, slowly." They made good time on the return journey, pushing harder now that they were headed home. Leora found herself anxious to see her daughters, to make sure they were safe. The certificate in her saddlebag felt both heavy and weightless, a promise and a burden. The cabin came into view on the evening of the third day, smoke rising from the chimney in a steady stream. Emma and Sarah were outside working in the garden, and when they saw Leora and Rhett approaching, they started running. Leora dismounted before the horse fully stopped and caught both girls in her arms, holding them so tight they protested. But she didn't care. They were safe. They were here. Everything else could wait. "We're fine, Mama," Emma said, "just like we told you we'd be." I know you are." That night, they showed the girls the certificate, explaining what it meant. Emma traced the words with her finger, sounding out the official language. "So it's really ours?" she asked. "Forever? If we prove it up, Leora said, 5 years of living here, working the land, making improvements. That's easy. We're already doing that. For 5 years straight. No leaving, no giving up. Emma looked at Rhett. Are you staying for 5 years? The question hung in the air. Everyone waited for his answer. I don't know, he said finally. But I'm here now. That's all I can promise. It wasn't the answer Emma wanted, but she accepted it with the pragmatism she'd learned from watching her mother survive impossible things. Summer deepened into a kind of routine that felt almost normal. The garden flourished, the crops growing faster than Leora had hoped. They added a chicken coop, Rhett grumbling the entire time about how much he hated chickens, and acquired 4 hens from a passing trader. The birds were as unpleasant as advertised, but they produced eggs, and eggs meant protein they didn't have to hunt for. Leora started making improvements to the cabin, small things that made it feel less like shelter and more like home. Shelves for their few possessions, a proper table instead of eating off their laps, curtains made from spare fabric to give some privacy at night. Rhett built a second room onto the cabin, an addition that gave the girls their own space. He didn't ask permission, just started the construction one morning and worked on it during his spare hours. When it was finished, Emma and Sarah moved their bedding in with such delight that Leora had to turn away to hide her tears. You didn't have to do that, she told Rhett later. They needed their own space. Growing girls shouldn't have to sleep in the same room as adults. Still, thank you. He shrugged like it was nothing, but Leora knew better. Every addition, every improvement, every choice to invest effort into this place was Rhett building roots, whether he admitted it or not. The cooperative woman's words came back to her sometimes. The idea of community, of not facing everything alone. Part of her wanted it desperately. The other part, the part that had been abandoned by people she'd trusted, was terrified of depending on anyone outside their small circle. She mentioned it to Rhett one evening while they worked on splitting firewood for the coming winter. What do you think about joining the cooperative? I think people are complicated and trust is expensive. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. He set another log on the stump. But I also think isolation only works for so long. Eventually you need other people, if only to trade with. So we should try it? I'm saying it might not hurt to go to one meeting. See what it's actually about. We don't have to commit to anything. Leora nodded slowly. The next meeting was 2 weeks away according to the schedule. 2 weeks to prepare, to think about what they'd say, to figure out if they were ready to let anyone else into their carefully constructed world. The garden's first harvest came in late summer, and it was better than Leora had dared hope. The potatoes were small but plentiful. The beans produced enough that they could eat some fresh and dry the rest for winter. The squash grew larger than expected, their hard shells promising months of stored food. They spent days harvesting, sorting, storing. The root cellar filled with vegetables. Beans hung drying in the rafters. Squash lined the shelves Rhett had built. Looking at their stores, Leora felt something that might have been security, not safety. The frontier didn't allow for safety, but the knowledge that they'd made it through 1 year and had a fighting chance at making it through another. Next year we'll plant more, she said, surveying their work. Next year, Rhett agreed. The casual assumption of future years together wasn't lost on either of them, but neither remarked on it. Some things were better left unspoken, allowed to grow quietly like the crops they'd planted. The cooperative meeting was held in a barn 15 miles south, close enough to reach in a day, but far enough that Leora felt like they were entering foreign territory. They'd left Emma and Sarah at home again, both girls more confident this time, Emma actually seeming annoyed that her mother was being overprotective. We survived last time, she'd said. We'll survive this time too. Hard to argue with that logic, even if it made Leora's chest tight with worry. The barn was already full when they arrived, maybe 20 people gathered in loose clusters. Farmers mostly, their hands showing the same calluses and scars Leora had developed. A few families with children, some solitary men who looked like they'd been alone too long. Everyone sized up the newcomers with the careful assessment of people who'd learned not to trust easily. The woman from town, her name was Martha, Leora learned, welcomed them with genuine warmth. Glad you came. Wasn't sure you would. We're cautious, Rhett said, which was putting it mildly. Smart. We all are, Martha gestured to the group. Why don't you introduce yourselves? Leora stepped forward, feeling exposed. I'm Leora Vance. This is Rhett Calder. We've got a homestead about 30 miles north. Been there since last fall. A murmur went through the group. Someone said, "That's rough country up there." "It is," Leora agreed, "but it's ours." "You make it through winter?" an older man asked. "We did." "In a cabin you built yourself?" "Yes." The man nodded slowly, and Leora saw respect register on several faces. Surviving your first winter in the Wyoming high country apparently meant something. The meeting itself was practical and straightforward. They discussed shared resources, who had extra seed to trade, who needed help with construction, which areas had good hunting and which were trapped out. A couple was struggling with a well that kept collapsing. 3 families volunteered to help dig a new one. Someone else had extra lumber from a fallen barn. People claimed what they needed. "It's not charity," Martha explained when Leora looked skeptical about the free exchange. "It's investment. Help someone today, they help you tomorrow. We all need each other to survive out here." "What if someone takes and doesn't give back?" Rhett asked. "Then they don't get invited to the next meeting." Martha's voice was steel under the pleasant tone. "We're generous, but we're not fools. Everyone contributes or everyone suffers." By the end of the meeting, Leora and Rhett had traded some of their dried beans for seed potatoes for next year's planting, promised to help with a barn raising in 2 weeks, and been offered assistance with expanding their own cabin if they needed it. It felt strange to be part of something larger than their small family unit, but not entirely bad. On the ride home, Rhett was quiet, processing. "What do you think?" Leora asked. "I think it's dangerous to depend on people." But it might be more dangerous not to. We can't do everything alone. And if we're going to be here for 5 years, he stopped. "If we're going to be here for 5 years, we need community," Leora finished. "You can say it. It's not a weakness." "Feels like one." "That's because you've spent too long thinking survival means isolation." Rhett looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "Maybe. Or maybe I just never had a reason to stay before." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was quite ready to unpack. Leora felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, but she kept her eyes forward, let the moment pass without forcing it into something it wasn't ready to be. The barn raising 2 weeks later was Leora's first real experience with frontier cooperation. 15 people showed up at dawn to help a young couple, barely 20, both of them, erect a structure they could never have built alone. The work was hard and hot, and occasionally chaotic, but by sunset the barn's frame stood solid against the sky. The couple was crying, overwhelmed with gratitude. The wife kept saying thank you, until her husband gently told her that was enough. Everyone understood. But Leora got it. She understood what it meant to receive help you desperately needed but never expected to get. Emma and Sarah had come this time, and they played with the other children while the adults worked. Watching her daughters interact with kids their own age, Leora realized how isolated they'd been. Sarah was laughing, actually laughing, chasing a boy around a wagon. Emma was helping a girl braid grass into small dolls. They needed this. Community wasn't just about survival, it was about living. That evening, around the communal fire, someone pulled out a fiddle. Music started, tentative at first, then building as others joined in with singing. The children danced, their small bodies twirling in the firelight. Some of the adults joined them, couples swaying together with the easy familiarity of long partnership. Leora sat watching, Sarah asleep against her shoulder, Emma leaning on her other side but fighting to stay awake. She felt Rhett settle beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Your daughters are good kids," he said. "They are. You helped raise them, you know, this past year." "I just kept them alive." "That's not nothing. That's everything." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that family isn't just blood. It's who you choose to stand with when everything goes to hell." "Your mother sounds like she was smart." "She was." He paused. "I think she would have liked you, would have said you're too stubborn for your own good, but she would have respected it." "Is that your way of saying you respect it?" "Maybe." Leora turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her life and stayed despite every reason to leave. The firelight caught the angles of his face, softening the hard lines the war had carved there. He looked almost peaceful. "I'm glad you stopped," she said, "that day you found us. I'm glad you didn't just keep riding." "So am I," Rhett said quietly. Then, even quieter, "Scared the hell out of me at first, still does sometimes. But I'm glad. It was the most direct admission she'd gotten from him about what this all meant, and Leora knew better than to push for more. Some things needed to unfold in their own time. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were lived. That was the important part. They expanded the cabin twice more, adding a proper bedroom for Leora, and eventually, after a conversation that was equal parts awkward and inevitable, one for Rhett that wasn't just the main room floor. They planted larger gardens each year, learning through trial and error what worked in their specific soil and climate. The chickens multiplied despite Rhett's ongoing complaints. They acquired a cow, then two, then a small herd. Emma grew tall and capable, her hands as skilled with tools as her mother's. She could shoot as well as Rhett, garden as well as Leora, and had developed a talent for animal husbandry that surprised everyone. Sarah remained quieter, but found her own strengths. She could read the weather better than anyone, knew which plants were medicinal and which were poison, had a way with the difficult cow that no one else could manage. The cooperative became central to their lives. They helped build 7 more barns, 3 houses, and a shared schoolhouse that meant the children could get proper education a few months a year. In return, when Leora's leg got infected again 2 years in, 3 families sent their women to help with the nursing and work she couldn't do. When Rhett broke his arm falling from the barn roof, men came to help with the heavy labor until he healed. But it was in the 3rd winter that everything changed. The season started hard and got worse. Snow came early and deep, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in the bucket before they could carry it inside. Their stores were better than the first winter, but not as good as they should have been. A dry summer had reduced the harvest, and several families in the cooperative were struggling. Martha showed up at their door in late January with a proposal that sounded insane. "There's a family 10 miles west," she said, warming herself by their fire. Newcomers. Arrived late fall and didn't prepare properly. They've got 5 children under 10 years old, and they're going to starve if someone doesn't help. "We can spare some food," Leora said, mentally calculating their reserves. "Not much, but some." "It's not just food. Their cabin's falling apart, roofs caving in from snow weight. They need shelter, and they need it now." Rhett's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to take them in." "I'm asking if you can. I know it's a lot. 7 more people in your space. But you've got the room and the supplies and—" Martha looked between them. "And you know what it's like to be left to die." The words landed like a physical blow. Leora felt the memory of that wagon wheel, of watching her own death approach while people rode away. Felt the weight of Rhett's choice to stop, to help, to stay. "How long?" Rhett asked. "Until spring. Until they can rebuild." "That's 3 months." "I know. 3 months with 7 extra people." "I know what I'm asking. And if you say no, I'll understand. I'll find another solution." Martha stood to leave. "But I thought I'd ask you first, because I know you understand." After she left, Leora and Rhett sat in silence. Emma and Sarah had listened to the whole conversation, and now they waited to see what their parents would decide. "We should do it," Emma said finally. "We have to." "We don't have to do anything," Rhett replied. "This is a choice, and it's not an easy one." "But it's the right one," Sarah added quietly. "Isn't it?" Leora looked at her daughters, these children who'd learned compassion despite every reason to become hard and selfish. Looked at Rhett, who was clearly calculating odds and supplies and risk. Looked at the cabin they'd built, the space they'd carved out of wilderness through sheer stubborn will. "We were them once," she said. "Dying, desperate, one decision away from being gone." "I know," Rhett said. "So?" He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the snow. "So we help. Even though it'll be crowded and difficult, and we might regret it. We help because someone helped us." They sent word to Martha the next morning, and by evening the family arrived. The parents looked shell-shocked, the children terrified. The youngest was maybe 2 years old, crying from cold and hunger. The mother kept apologizing, saying they'd be gone as soon as possible. They didn't mean to be a burden. "You're not a burden," Leora told her. "You're survivors. We know something about that." The next 3 months tested every bit of patience and resourcefulness they'd developed. 12 people in a cabin built for 4 meant no privacy, no space, constant negotiation over every resource. The father, his name was Joseph, was proud and struggling with accepting charity. The mother, Margaret, cried often from shame and gratitude and exhaustion. The children ranged from helpful to chaotic, and more than once Leora wanted to scream from the sheer overwhelming press of humanity in every corner. But they managed. Rhett organized the men into work crews, getting Joseph involved in repairs and hunting, so he'd feel useful. Leora taught Margaret what she knew about preserving food and frontier medicine, passing along knowledge the way it had been passed to her. Emma and Sarah took charge of the younger children, organizing games and activities that kept everyone sane. And slowly, something shifted. Joseph stopped apologizing and started contributing. Margaret began smiling. The children filled the cabin with noise that was exhausting but also alive. They became not just refugees being sheltered, but part of the household, their presence changing the dynamic in ways both challenging and unexpectedly rich. One night after everyone had finally fallen asleep, Leora and Rhett sat by the dying fire, the only two still awake in the packed cabin. "This is what you did for us," Leora said quietly. "You took in 3 strangers and let them change your entire life. I didn't have a life before you, just existence. Still, you made room when you didn't have to." Rhett looked around at the sleeping forms, at the family they'd saved. "I'm starting to understand something my mother tried to tell me before I left for the war. She said that home isn't a place. It's people you'd fight for, people you'd sacrifice for, people who matter enough to make the hard choice worthwhile. Is this home for you now?" He looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were clear and certain. "Yeah, it is." "Even when it's crowded and chaotic and probably going to drive you insane?" "Especially then." Spring came eventually, as it always did. Joseph's family rebuilt their cabin with help from the cooperative, this time doing it right. Strong walls, solid roof, proper foundation. They moved out with tears and gratitude and promises to pay back the kindness however they could. The cabin felt enormous and quiet after they left. Sarah actually complained about how empty it was. But within a week, they'd adjusted back to their smaller number, and life continued its forward momentum. In the 4th year, Rhett asked Leora to marry him. He did it badly, fumbling over words by the creek one evening while the girls were at the schoolhouse. "I know we've been living like family for years now, and I know we don't need a ceremony to make it official, but I thought, if you wanted—" "Yes," Leora said, saving him from further struggle. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, obviously." "Obviously?" "Rhett, we've been building a life together for 4 years. We're raising children together. We nearly froze to death together. If that's not a marriage, I don't know what is. This just makes it legal." He laughed, the sound surprised and relieved. "When you put it that way." "Is there another way to put it?" "No, I guess there isn't." They married in late summer at the cooperative gathering, surrounded by the community they'd become part of. It wasn't a fancy ceremony. Martha officiated. They exchanged simple promises. Emma and Sarah served as witnesses and cried through the whole thing. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. The 5th year arrived faster than Leora expected. In the early fall, they rode to the land office to prove up their claim. The same board official was there, and he actually looked surprised to see them. "You made it," he said. "We did," Leora confirmed. He examined their documentation, records of improvements, testimony from neighbors, proof of continuous residence. Everything was in order. He stamped the final papers with an air of someone who didn't see this happen often. "Land's officially yours," he said, "free and clear. You can't lose it now unless you sell it or stop paying taxes." Leora held the deed in her hands, this piece of paper that represented 5 years of backbreaking work, countless sacrifices, moments of despair and determination. The land they'd fought for was theirs. Actually, legally, permanently theirs. Outside the office, Rhett pulled her close. "We did it." "We did?" 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be a married landowner with 2 daughters, I'd have called them crazy. And if someone had told me I'd survive being left for dead and build a life from nothing, I wouldn't have believed them either. Leora looked at the deed again. "But here we are?" "Here we are," Rhett echoed. They rode home slowly, savoring the victory. The valley opened before them as they approached, and Leora saw it with fresh eyes. The cabin had expanded into something approaching a real house. The garden plots had multiplied. The barn stood solid. The chicken coop was full of those terrible chickens. The root cellar was already half stocked for the coming winter. Smoke rose from the chimney where Emma was probably starting dinner. It wasn't perfect, The house still needed repairs every season. The winters were still brutal. The work never ended. But it was theirs, built by hands that had learned to create instead of just survive. Emma and Sarah ran out to meet them, both girls taller now, Sarah approaching adolescence and Emma not far behind. They'd grown up here, their childhood shaped by this valley and the lessons it taught. "Did you get it?" Emma asked. "Is it official?" Leora handed her the deed. "It's official. This land belongs to us, to our family." Sarah hugged her mother hard. "We're really staying forever?" "Forever," Leora confirmed. "This is home." That evening, they gathered around the table Rhett had built. Solid oak, big enough for family and guests, and shared a meal. It wasn't fancy food, just what they'd grown and raised and preserved. But it tasted like victory. After dinner, Rhett pulled out the small wooden animals he'd carved years ago for the girls. They were worn now from handling, some showing repairs where pieces had broken. He lined them up on the table, a horse, a deer, a rabbit, a bear. "I made these during our first winter," he said, "when I wasn't sure we'd make it to spring. I made them so you'd have something to remember me by if I didn't survive." Emma touched the horse gently. "I remember. We played with them every day. I want you to keep them, but not as a memory of survival, as a reminder of what you're capable of." Rhett looked at both girls. "You two have seen more hardship than most people face in a lifetime. You've worked harder, sacrificed more, endured things that would break adults. And you did it without becoming cruel or bitter or defeated." "Because you and Mama taught us," Sarah said. "We taught you to survive. You chose to do it with grace." Leora felt tears threatening. "You're making me cry at dinner. That's not fair. Life's not fair. You taught me that." But Rhett was smiling. "You also taught me that unfair doesn't mean hopeless, that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, that family is whoever shows up when you need them most." "Is this going to turn into a long speech?" Emma asked. "Because I have homework." Everyone laughed, the moment breaking into something lighter. Emma gathered the wooden animals carefully, like the treasures they were, and carried them to the shelf where she kept her important things. Later, after the girls had gone to bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Leora and Rhett sat outside under stars so bright they looked artificial. The valley spread before them, dark and peaceful, the creek providing its constant background music. "What are you thinking about?" Leora asked. "That day I found you, how close I came to just riding past." "But you didn't." "No, and my entire life changed because of it." Rhett turned to look at her. "I thought I was saving you. Turns out you were saving me." "We saved each other." "Yeah, we did." Leora leaned against him, comfortable with the silence and the closeness. "Do you ever regret it, stopping that day?" "Not even once." "Not even during the worst parts?" "Especially not then. The worst parts taught me I could survive anything as long as I wasn't alone. That's worth more than every easy day I had before." They sat there until the cold drove them inside, and then they banked the fire and climbed into the bed they shared, the life they'd built settling around them like a blanket. The years continued after that, each one adding new layers to their story. The girls grew and eventually married, Emma to a farmer from the cooperative, Sarah to a teacher who'd come west for adventure. They built their own homesteads within riding distance, creating an extended family network that spread through the valley. Rhett and Leora grew older, their hands more scarred, their bodies showing the wear of frontier life. But they grew older together, watching their grandchildren play in the same creek where they'd once fought to survive, teaching the next generation the lessons they'd learned about perseverance and community, and choosing to help when help was needed. On quiet evenings, Leora would sometimes take out that old wagon wheel. They'd dragged it back to the homestead years ago, letting it weather in the yard as a reminder. The wood was rotting now, the metal rusted, but it still stood as testament to where they'd started. "Do you ever think about them?" Rhett asked once, finding her looking at it. "The people who left you." "Sometimes. I wonder if they made it to California. If they ever thought about us. If leaving people to die bothered them at all." "Probably not." "No, probably not." Leora touched the wheel's rim. "But it doesn't matter anymore. They made their choice. We made ours, and our choice gave us this." She gestured at the homestead, the expanded house, the multiple outbuildings, the fields and gardens and grazing animals. The life they'd wrested from impossible beginnings. Our choice gave us everything, Red agreed. Eventually, even the wheel rotted away completely, leaving just a circular mark in the dirt. But by then, they didn't need physical reminders. Their entire existence was a reminder of what happens when someone chooses compassion over convenience, when they choose to stop instead of ride past, when they choose to build instead of abandon. The frontier that had once tried to kill them became their legacy. The valley that had been wild and unwelcoming transformed into a thriving homestead that would outlast them both. The family they'd cobbled together from desperation became something strong and permanent. And on the final page of their story, when old age had slowed them both and the house was full of children and grandchildren gathered for celebration, Leora looked at Rhett across the crowded room and thought about that dying woman by a wagon wheel, about the stranger on horseback who'd made an impossible choice, about everything that had followed from that single moment of unexpected mercy. She thought about how easy it would have been for him to keep writing, how reasonable, how understandable. She thought about how grateful she was that he hadn't, because in the end, survival wasn't the victory. The victory was building something worth surviving for. The victory was choosing connection over isolation, community over self-preservation, hope over resignation. The victory was looking at impossible odds and deciding they weren't impossible enough to stop trying. The victory was that day by the wheel when a hard man made a soft choice and changed 4 lives forever. That was the story they'd tell their grandchildren, not just the hardship and the hunger and the brutal winters, but the moment when someone stopped when they could have kept going, when they stayed when they could have left, when they chose a family that wasn't theirs and made it theirs through action and sacrifice and stubborn, impossible, beautiful love. That was the story worth telling. That was the legacy worth leaving. And as the evening drew on and the fire burned low and the generations they'd created filled the house with life and laughter, Rhett caught Leora's eye across the room and smiled. Not the careful, guarded expression he'd worn when they first met, but something open and content and utterly at peace. She smiled back, understanding perfectly what that look meant. It meant, we made it. It meant, we built this. It meant, I'd do it all again. And she would too. Every brutal day, every impossible choice, every moment of fear and doubt and determination. Because those moments had led here, to this room full of family, to this life they'd created from nothing but will and work, and the decision to keep going when stopping would have been easier. The frontier had taken plenty from them, but it had given them something too. A chance to become more than they'd been. A chance to prove that kindness wasn't weakness, and that choosing to help wasn't foolishness. A chance to show that the hardest things often led to the best things if you were brave enough to see them through. Outside, the valley that had witnessed their entire journey lay quiet under stars. The land they'd claimed and fought for and finally earned. The home they'd built when home had seemed impossible. And inside, the family born from one stranger's choice not to ride past sat together in the warmth, living proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when you choose to stop, to stay, to build, to love despite every logical reason not to. That was their story. That was their truth. And it was enough.